Once again, greetings, Yahweh, Anolip. Yahweh? That's a lot better. So before I start my presentation, I would like to acknowledge, because in my culture and tradition, we have to acknowledge our leaders and also our, because Honorable Senator Kadlang is one of our honorable senator, and also she is from the line of the Paramount Chiefs back home. So, Kulim Kaudiyok, Senator. It's an honor to be in front of her. She's one of the few women that I really look up to regarding culture and also as a leader. My name is Solynn Bajo, and I am the Media Assistant Archivist and Museum Liaison at Alele Museum. Next slide. On the slide, you can see this is a picture of my homeland, like the Republic of the Marshall Island, and it's an island consists of 25 coral atolls and 5 single islands. Next slide. Where I'm from, it's Madro, which is the capital city of the RMI, and it's where Alele is located. Next slide. Alele Museum is the only museum and public library in the Marshall Island, and the mission of Alele is to promote lifelong learning through informational, technological, and cultural literacy for all age by providing various forms of information access via traditional means such as printed documents, books, and videos, and digitized and online documents. The name Alele itself is being a significant traditional basket used to hold a family's most prized possession. In reflection of his name, Alele is the National Museum of the Marshall Island dedicated to preserving and promoting the traditional knowledge of the Marshallese people, because who are we without our culture and tradition? Next slide. So, if you can look here, this is the museum. And my job as museum liaison is to give tours. And here's an overall of the small part of the museum. It's not a big, there's not enough space. So we have to relocate. The museum is actually storage building. So the first floor, if you come in, you'll see a big part of our history. And the best thing about it is it's free for everyone to come and see. So, because our first president, he wanted people to learn about the culture and traditions for free. Because if you want to go somewhere as someone who's going as a tourist, you wanted to learn more, to be able to blend in with the people, or to be able to learn what to and what not to do, and to learn the history of the place. So next slide, please. So there's 2 large collections in the museum. One of them is the Jokum Tipum collection, which has the glass plate negatives and also 25 boxes of documentation filled with ledgers from when Jokum Tipum, because he was the first businessman who had a camera where he took picture and landscape of the Marshall Island, especially the Gib and Jelots. So his collection is one of the very few ones that are involved from the different family in Alele. And we're doing the best of our ability to make sure that his collection is being digitized, because it holds a valuable not legend, but more valuable knowledge on the Marshall Island during his era. Next slide, please. So here it's the audiovisual collection digitization project, and we have a lot of tapes in our. It's also one of the largest collections. And in this picture right here, you'll see this old man. His name is Solynn Frank. He's been working at Alele for a very long time. And his job, along with the Historical Preservation Office, they went around the atolls, some of the atolls, and they collected all these traditional chanting, traditional knowledge, and they also went to specific atolls that have like legends regarding the atolls. And he has 700 audio and video cassette. And like I say, they have traditional folktales from certain atolls, traditional chanting, and events because in the Marshall Island, our museum is in charge of doing the culture event called the Ludo Kopanalele, where it's happening every end of September, and throughout that last week of September, we always come up with certain ideas on what to do, events for the school so they could follow like themes. Like for Monday, it will be Marshallese Hat Day. So you have to come to school with a hat made from either Marshallese coconut or a Marshallese pandas woven by hand. And we also we have like all these crazy ideas. But it focus mostly on our tradition and what Marshallese do with everything they see around them. And we also have videos of Christmas celebration, and it's a dance we call Beat. And it's really popular. If you ever come to the Marshall Island, please come during Christmas time, and you will be enjoy like a lot of food and also like dances. So Langanago is using a studio called the Pinnacle Studio to digitize all his projects. And I forgot to mention, but in the Jokum Boom project, I am the one in charge of it, and I am using the PAS Perfect software as a digitization. So here you can see the Alele Public Library, and we're the only public library, like I mentioned, and it's open for the public Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, and we're also the first one to have a book mobile that is going around the Madro, which to go to the, because in Madro we have we say city version of it, and then at the far end of Madro there is also the rural areas where we have to bring, because it's like really far. I forgot to put a slide in for the picture of Madro, so please excuse me. Next slide, please. So here is the National Archive. As Alele is also, like I mentioned, is a public museum, public library, and also it's where the National Archive is. And inside the National Archive, we have the class plate negative from the Jogum Defrum family, the documents, scales, model of boats, buildings, and more importantly, we have the desk, table, and chair of the first former president of the Marshall Island, Amata Kabwa. So these are some of the challenges we face in the museum, because like I say, it's not a big building, and it's been there for a very long time. And if you look through it, you can see that we've been having problems with water on the displays, and then whenever it rains, it comes through the buildings. Next slide, please. And regarding climate change, this is an example. I also did a research and took photos from some of the islands that have been impacted by climate change. So since the Marshall Island is a country of atolls with no high elevation at all, it is most likely that our nation will become uninhabitable and disappear with climate change and sea level rise. And some of the challenges that we face regarding in the museum is we've been talking about if ever we were to move, where would we put our artifacts? Do we ship it somewhere else? And what about the original items? Are we to discard them, or should they be shipped and stored somewhere in a more permanent place? But the other question is where? But the question that I've been thinking about regarding climate change and the people is what will happen to my culture? What will happen to my kids, my great-grandkids? Will they be able to learn what I've learned throughout the years of why it's important for us to secure our land? Because our land is where we made these beautiful handicrafts, the one I'm wearing, and also Senator Kutlang, and it's handwoven by the women in our communities. And our land is where we get our food and main source of livelihood, especially fish and sashimi, because we're really known for having the lowest sales on fish and sashimi. And I know everybody here loves fish. But if you don't, then my apologies. But me, I am also a mother, and last week I had before I came here, I talked with my siblings regarding climate change, and one of my little sisters said something that really made a big impact on what she said, and it got me really emotional. Was like, She asked me like, if ever we were to disappear, are we to move to the United States or somewhere where we could be, and how am I, what she said, oh, sorry, I get really emotional. She said like, what if I don't want to move? What if I want to stay here? Even if it means I have to swim, I really want to stay here in my island because it's where I was born, and it's, for me, she used me as an example. For you, you're really emotional about and really passionate about your cultures and tradition, and I know that you don't want that to be gone, especially for the future generation. So, with that being said, we're still looking for a solution for as a museum. So I'd be happy to learn from each and every one of you. So, como tada in karama ng olive.
Hey, aloha kako. My name is Kanenkokuke Schultz. I work for the nonprofit KHAW and have just a pleasure of doing a lot of different land-based restoration. My background actually is in seaweed phycology. I got a master's at University of Hawaii. So my wish always is to return back to the ocean. But for some reason, I'm kind of stuck in mud. So anyway, but with that said, first slide should be the maps of He'eia. You can still hear me, huh? Okay, grab the mic, sorry.
That's right, one right there.
Left? Yeah. Check. Okay. So He'eia is located on the island of Oahu in the moku of Ko'olapoko. And this is kind of the area of He'eia. The Ahupua'a of He'eia basically extends all the way up to here, goes out to Mokapu, and then out into the ocean, and that's the Ahupua'a of He'eia. The wetland is basically right here, and we're fortunate that it's under the ownership of the state of Hawaii. Hawaii Community Development Authority is actually the organization that owns it, which creates a whole other level of different types of land management, which for the Kupuna He'eia and for our nonprofit, we've been able to use it kind of to our advantage. Going to the next image for you guys. Actually, go back to the other map. Kind of more detail. This is one of the maps in our partnership with the Department of Defense and the REPI program, looking at the full restoration. And so, next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this is kind of our master plan, right? And so when you look at the Ahupua'a He'eia, this is a 1928 aerial image. Are you guys feeling lonely over there? Do I need to walk there too? Or you guys okay? All right. What you see is basically 300 acres of Hawaii. But I really want you to focus on the upper image, which is a fish pond. And right above that, you see the white sands of Malauka'a. So you have a 300-acre area of wetlands in full agricultural system, yet you still see white sand. Okay? And what we saw with that, but you also see a fish pond. And that fish pond, can you see the reef in that fish pond? Not really, right? And so what that coloration is probably the phytoplankton that was blooming inside of it, making it kind of a murky color. We often think of dirty or murky water as something bad, but as a phycologist, I actually see that as a lot of healthy things growing in it. Okay, productivity. And so we see this agriculture, we see a healthy fish pond, we see white sand, and we see a pretty healthy coral ring of reef around it. And we're like, okay, fast forward today, if we can all look around, we see this, and we have a groundwater advisory in Waikiki. We lose about $25 million, I think, and we shut down that area. Okay? When they had flooding back then, it held it. This image to my left is basically a small sediment pulse that occurred in He'eia, and unfortunately, you see a really dark-colored fish pond, right? And what that shows is basically our ancestors enclosing that 88 acres and acting as a retainment basin. Obviously, the crabs and the fish that were in that did not survive that day, but it protected the broader coral reef. And in that image, way off in the distance, is Mokapu, and you don't see that sediment plume going out there, which impacts their coral reef. So you see an immediate relationship between what happened Mauka and then what happened Makai, right? So Mauka is the mountainous area, Makai is the ocean. Okay? You still there? You guys are pretty much from Hawaii, or can you understand? Oh, that is my pigeon, pretty bad. I'll slow down my articulation. Okay. And so, as we restore these taro patches and kind of go back to that traditional system, we look forward to being able to mitigate those sediment pulses. Next slide, please. Can you read that? So this is one of the result chains that we created long ago. And so the belief was that if we have if we have local ia and fish ponds present, then we can bank the water. If we can hold this sediment, if we can bank the water, i.e. increase residence time, then we can hold the sediment in that water, right? Right, and if we hold the sediment and the water on the land, then that sediment will no longer be traveling downstream into what? The fish pond, which is our cultural area we want to restore, but also the coral reefs below. Common sense, right? Now, when we were in that process of holding the water on our property, and we were growing corn or sweet potato, what's going to happen to those crops? They're going to completely disappear. But our ancestors grew up one of our older brothers, which is called KHAW or arrow, and that can stay underwater for about 3 days. They're not happy, but it can survive. So if you're looking at climate change, one of the major issues that we're seeing with Hawaii is increased severity of storm systems with an overall decrease in rain, and you have a crop that can be underwater for a couple of days. Oh, that might be a good thing to do. And then, oh my gosh, our ancestors have been doing it for 2,000 years, so maybe they know something, right? And so when you talk about preserving our culture, preserving our land, it is looking to that source. Look to that source of what our ancestors did, and it can probably lead us into the future. Does that make sense? Okay, so going back to the result chain, right? And obviously, if we have increased habitat if we can pond more water, then not only are we ponding sediment, but a lot of the anthropogenic sources of nutrients that then create blooms in the ocean can also be cleaned, right? And so, looking at the traditional taro system, think of it as your kidneys, right? Basically, it's allowed to filter through a lot of that system. And so not only is it able to filter a system, it provides cultural activities for our people, provides habitat for endangered birds and fish, and also provides that other ecosystem service of mitigation of sediment. Okay? So I was told 8 minutes, so I can slow down a little bit. Okay. Well, next slide, please. Yeah. And so this is just an image of one of our little āina. Here you basically see. And so I'll just touch on that. Within He'eia, even though we have 300 acres of land, one of our biggest issues is not having a stable water source. It's lush and green, right? We have too much water at one time, not enough water during the rest of it. And so we've had to basically modify our systems to basically create what they call as a pu'e system, which is a mounded system. And so what that allows is basically the water table is about right there, which makes it pretty anoxic. By having the pu'e or the mounded system, it allows for the aerobic bacteria to survive. You have cousins. Are you in the middle range of your family? Okay, I'm in the middle range of my family. So when we were growing up, my older cousins would eat everything before we could eat everything. And so that's really similar when you look at aerobic bacteria and anaerobic bacteria. Anaerobic bacteria will digest nitrogen at a much faster rate. When you step into bogs and areas, you see the bubbling, that's hydrogen sulfide. Okay? By elevating up your soil, you basically are allowing the taro to eat the aerobic bacteria and the nutrients in it. Okay? So we found that if we did a traditional taro system which was flooded, anoxic bacteria would basically overtake the taro and they would get sick. So by elevating it up over the surface of the water, we've been able to grow. That's kind of one of our climate strategies, right? If we don't have as much healthy water, or maybe the water is saltier, some of our taro can be elevated up above ground. Does that make sense? We're also blessed to have it because we can help you. Yes?
When is it advantageous to not have mountains and for it to be flooded?
So our cousins in Honolulu, and when they have beautiful water systems, a lot of water systems. Their water is really oxygenated, so it can be flooded. Right? It's more about your water source. For obviously the Ulu Auamo, there's a there's a severe issue with having water here, right? We did lose about 25% from a lava aquifer. And that's a huge issue for us because where's that water coming out? It's coming out of the windward side. And so we're seeing almost a decrease in it, right? So even though I don't fit in the corner. Anyway, even though we know the tanks basically did pollute that, they shut down the lava, they still needed to feed everything around us here. Where's the water coming from? And so there is an issue, and we commend the DOD for working with our communities to get it better, right? So yeah, that's our big issue for us in KHAW. We would love to flood, but we just not be able, we won't be able to. Okay, next slide. So when we talk about KHAW and restoration, there wasn't a slide with kids and. Try next slide, just in case. Okay, we're back. All right. There was a slide that we wanted where we were looking at food. So for KHAW, right, our big push obviously is for the restoration of the land. So there's also about the restoration of the culture. And so within that, we are very much looking at doing food production. Ms. Owens was there yesterday. I have no problem asking our federal and state partners for funding. We also, as a nonprofit, want to make sure that we're also in it on the fight. We're looking at our own revenue generation, our own systems that we can then sustain our people on. And so, inside this area is actually a poi mill and a commercial kitchen where we do a lot of value-added products to feed our own community. And so, obviously, with increased severity of storms and hurricanes, when that hurricane comes through, we basically want to make sure that we can sustain our population and our community. And taro is one of those important pieces that can mitigate and hopefully be resilient to flooding and hurricane. Does that make sense? And the systems that we integrate in KHAW basically can help to transcend into Kaneohe Bay and also all the way up to Mukapu. Like Kevin said, we thought it was going to be a panel where we could just kind of talk back and forth. But anyway, this is kind of the contemporary vision right now. You can see that with the support of NOAA, Nature Conservancy, and future REPI funding, we're able to remove the mangrove, which is a non-native species in Hawaii. And from a species of about 7, we're now about 35. Anyway, and you can see the fish pond slowly removing the mangrove and rebuilding a native wetland system that functions similar to a mangrove forest. Okay? What else? Anyway, with that said, I don't know, come on to KHAW when you guys have time this week. You guys are all welcome to talk. Okay? All right, why don't we bring up the rest of the panelists and we can have a discussion now. Perfect.
Good morning, everyone. Very honored and humbled to be here. I'm going to take Madam Senator's cue and walk around, I think, because I need to look at my slides. I don't remember the sequence of them. I wanted to start by just following on from Madam Senator's remarks, because I'll be at Ibai Island and Roinamuru in a couple of weeks, and you can thank the gentleman sitting next to you for that, because after the January event happened, we went to Honorable Owens, we briefed him that we can reconstruct these events, and Honorable Owens said that's not good enough. We need to be able to prepare and to be able to forecast these. So we're actually going there to plan for deploying some sensors and developing models, working with Navy and Air Force to be able to predict these in the future. So, and we can definitely talk about that later on. Actually, let me grab it. So yeah, I'm in the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy Resilience and Optimization within ENIE under Honorable Owens. And you see a bunch of letters next to my name, but the ones to relevant here are the DCE. So I'm actually a certified coastal engineer. So sea level rise and coastal change and coastal flooding are very personally passionate subject topics to me, and particularly for the Pacific Islands. So I'll share a little bit about what we're doing with regard to climate literacy in DoD, and also focus on some of the things we're doing with Pacific Islands, specifically with regard to sea level rise and coastal inundation change. Next slide, please. So these are some quotes all the way from our Secretary to DSD, and including Honorable Owens. And the point of this is to demonstrate that when DoD is looking at climate change, we're looking at the impacts to our mission. It's not about, greening DoD or looking at climate change just because we want to. These are having real impacts to every facet of our mission, including our installations, including our warfighters, including our communities that we have to work with, and every aspect of our operations. This is one of the big threat multipliers that we have in terms of national security. We are dealing with it in a variety of ways. Next slide, please. So we do have a definition for climate literacy. This has just been formalized with our DASD for Force Education and Training. And what it says is that climate literate service member understands how climate change affects geostrategic, again, operational and tactical environments that impact the DoD's mission. We understand the basic elements of human impact on the climate. So this is not just natural climate variability, but the anthropogenic impacts that we have on climate change. We know how to identify scientifically credible information about the climate. There is a lot of data and information out there, which is increasing significantly by the day, and it causes confusion among end users and also among DoDs to make sure that the information we use is actionable, it's credible, and it is authoritative. And that is what we do within our office. And we communicate effectively about the climate and climate change. We recognize when and how to apply climate considerations across our decision-making process in ways that are appropriate to the mission, function, and role. So this is not, any aspect of climate change doesn't affect all aspects of DoD the same way. So recognizing that they're different, the missions and the roles, the infrastructure, and applying it accordingly. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are within the climate literacy framework. These are some quotes from our DASD, Ms. Caroline Baxter, in terms of best practices that we have found, and lessons learned that we have found in terms of communicating within DoD about climate change. And so the first one is deciding who needs to know what about climate change. Again, like I said, not everyone in DoD, from the warfighter to say DoD leadership, wants to know the same information or the same messaging about climate change. So for example, this says that it's Air Force maybe who wants to understand how warming air temperatures will decrease their payload, how say extreme heat is going to impact the runways, further reducing their ability to fly missions. Second, meeting people where they are. So this is not separately considering climate change, but integrating it within our training, within our mission parameters. And third, which is surprising that Caroline Dasby Baxter said, was that don't talk about climate change. This is not something which is separate. This is about the mission and how the mission is being impacted by climate change. It's not a separate thing that we're trying to solve, but we're trying to adapt and mitigate how it impacts our mission. And fourth, again, along the same lines, make clear that there is no trade-off between mission and climate. Right? We're not addressing one without the other. We know how climate change impacts the mission. We are going to address the climate change impacts to be ready with regard to our mission. Next slide, please. So in terms of mission impacts, we all know about the hazards that are there, the drought, the coastal flooding, which we're talking about here, including sea level rise and inundation. There's inland flooding from rainfall and riverine flooding, extreme temperature. But the real issue here is how do these hazards, these climate hazards, whether it's extreme events, whether it's the more chronic climate change indicators, for example, sea level rise, how do these impact DoD? So what are the mission impacts? And you'll see a bunch of examples here. These are just some of the pathways, so to speak, that we're trying to map out, trying to relate these hazard indicators, those are the subset climate change parameters, and how they're affecting different aspects of the DoD mission, including, again, the infrastructure, including the warfighter, including our installations, including our operations. And some of the examples you see on the right side, and there's the January 2024 massive wave event at Kwajalein And these are obviously exacerbated because of higher sea level rise. I mean, that same way if it happens under a smaller sea level, say that happened 20 years ago, would cause much less impact. And these impacts are projected to increase because sea level rise is increasing. The storms are getting more intense. So DOD has had to absorb billions and billions of dollars of damages because of these recent events in the last several years. And there's another example here of the July catastrophic flooding that happened in West Point, New York. This was a massive rain event. And when we did the analysis of the rainfall event, we saw that it was about a 10,000-year event when you look at just the 3 hours or 6 hours of rainfall that fell. And these are not going away. I mean, we're seeing more and more of these extreme events, very high intense events, which are very, very rare or have very high return periods. Next slide, please. These are some of the other examples, not necessarily related to flooding, but also the other 4 hazards that we track within DOD, from energy demand, which you can imagine because of the increased heat, wildfire. Some of these are compounded as well, as Madam Senator talked about, land degradation and wildfire followed by, for example, very heavy rainfall leads to higher debris flooding and higher impacts. And we also look at, again, these historic extreme conditions, what has happened in the past, and working a lot to attribute impacts of climate change to these extreme weather events. Like we've been asked by the Deputy Secretary in terms of the investments we're making in climate resilience, how much did climate change contribute to this extreme event that you saw? These are not very easy questions to address, and it takes a lot of scientific study and rigor, but that's what we're setting out to do, to understand how it is actually impacting DOD through these extreme events. Next slide, please. You might have seen this concept before, but this is how DOD approaches resilience. Resilience is defined within DOD in our directives, and it's a combination of both adaptation and mitigation. So adaptation, you see at the top, that's managing the unavoidable impacts because of climate change, whether it's flooding, whether it's extreme heat. And then mitigation is being able to avoid the unmanageable impacts. And that's reducing, for example, GHG emissions in areas. And here in the second bullet, I've included water resilience as well, because again, as Senator said, climate change and water and energy, these are not separate things. We know these are interlinked. We know too much water or too less water can also, or for example, drought and extreme energy demands also affect the energy resilience. So we look at resilience in an integrated, holistic manner within DOD, including energy, water, and all these other climate change hazards. Next slide, please. This is something I'm very proud of. We've been working with Ashley Baxter's office to get a one-stop focal point or landing for all things climate within DOD. And hopefully that is easy to remember, climate.mil. It's the easiest URL we can come up with. And then it provides all the other resources, including our plans, including our directives, including climate resilience tools that we have from within that single site. Currently, this is publicly accessible, so that if you type in climate.mil on your phone, you'll be able to get to that site. You will see that there are still DOD-only links there. For example, the CAC-enabled tools that are only available to people within DOD. But it does provide a good resource of all the plans and strategies that are publicly accessible within DOD. Next slide, please. Okay, so talking about the DOD plan, the Climate Adaptation Plan from 2021. We're just submitting the update, the 2024 to 27. There are these lines of effort that are there in the Climate Adaptation Plan and the strategic outcomes through these enablers, and the end state, which is that ensuring DOD can operate under whatever the changing climate conditions may be to preserve our readiness and enhancing the natural and man-made systems essential to the Department of Defense. And one of the top ones there is the climate-informed decision-making. So this is where the tools come in. How do we make those decisions if we don't have actionable intelligence, actionable analytics, and quantifiable decisions or information? And that's where we have the DoD climate assessment tool, which provides a screening level assessment of exposure from all those hazards that you saw to our installations and infrastructure. And right now, these are only focused on DoD installations and sites across the globe, but we are moving to a completely installation agnostic approach. So this will be like a global tool where you will be able to click at a point on the map and access and download the climate information at that location around the globe. Because we do realize that we obviously do not operate just within the fence line in the silo. We work very closely with communities and our partners outside the fence line. We want to be able to seamlessly look inside and outside the fence line on the climate hazards. Next slide, please. Okay, so about the Pacific Islands specifically, we've created a number of dashboards, climate dashboards. You see Guam on the left. These are populated with mostly publicly available information. So we have information about coastal flooding, riverine flooding, heat hazard between temperatures. There are about 33 climate hazards that we track, and they're fully gridded. Again, you can just click on a point on the island. So this is Guam, and we have CNMI as well. And it will give you the change in the climate indicator over time, so looking at mid-century and end-century. And also you can look at the impacts it'll have on infrastructure. For example, this is showing how flooding is going to impact, say, runways or buildings and roads and such. And these are at about a nominal 20 meter by 20 meter resolution, so very high resolution. Now, we've already developed it for several of those Pacific Islands you see on the screen, and we have several more that are in development, and these are starting with the islands that have strategic interest to DoD. But again, like I said, we're going to eventually move to a complete global framework where you will be able to look at any island and any location around the world. We're working very closely with the State Department and NASA and other federal partners to get the information. For example, sea level rise, NASA tracks it very closely. They have tools. The state government is the State Department is very interested in collaborating with us because DoD collects a lot of data, including, say, elevation data with LiDARs. So just, again, collaboration across the federal government so that we benefit, but also the larger federal government benefits. Next slide, please. Again, like I said, I mean, we also treat water resilience no differently than climate resilience. And we are looking, again, water, too little water, too much water, right? So looking at water sources that are relevant to DoD, whether it's coming from groundwater or surface water or other desal or other, and what the projections of those are out into mid-century and end-century. Like the SERDIP report for Kwajalein, because of sea level rise and the groundwater, the salinity intrusion that's happening to groundwater, the freshwater sources on those islands are extremely in danger. Next slide, please. And the point of this slide is people get paralyzed that, oh, there's lots of uncertainty about climate change, and no decisions are made. We have plenty of information now to do adaptation and mitigation, both of those, but particularly adaptation. I mean, I've been designing and building projects for the last 2 decades. I mean, I knew about sea level rise, and there was uncertainty. But you can build in adaptation, adaptive design, all of those, but we have to start adapting now, specifically for these Pacific Islands, more vulnerable receptors and facilities that we have. Next slide, I think that's the end of it. So I'll stop there. This picture shows some of the recent events that have happened. So this is Tyndall Air Force Base, for example. This is the West Point flooding. All the way from chronic effects, like you see on the right, with sea level rise and corrosion that happens on seaside, oceanside infrastructure, to flooding on hill slopes that happens after land degradation and extreme rainfall, and direct wind damages to our infrastructure. So I'll end there. My contact information is there, and I'll be here for the rest of the day. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you all and learning as much as I can. So thank you.
E ala e alupu. Ke ala li uho a kalani, ki hei aku I ka halawai he. Hu! Kaumai ka auamo, hali I kumakua, maka ka puni ka umeke pohe pohe, ka heo ana ka heo la. Koko velu velu pa hono ia, ua pa ua pala. Ave ave pu alu, e alu pu. Ki ilili, ku olo ku. How's it, everybody? That is a chant and oli written by the Ealupu Network with the help of Sam Gon, who's in the room today, will be speaking to you later today. Ealupu means move forward together. They're a network of rural Native Hawaiian communities engaged in malama āina, or care for that which feeds us, the land. And they wanted to work together, and that's why I'm here today. That Ole talks about looking back at a time before Hawaii was called Hawaii. And the Ole talks about taking care of the forests of our lands, making sure and assuring that natives thrive, that the native resources thrive, that the community is woven back together into a strong net. And it asks at the end, are we ready? There's a call for readiness. And at the end of that chant is, yes, we are ready. I wonder what is the cultural ethic that leads us, and I say us, to drop 67 nuclear bombs on a community, an island community. Where does that come from? I think some of that is what our communities are trying to address, but we don't talk about it in that manner. My name is Kevin Chang. I'm the executive director of an organization called āina Ulu Auamo, which means grassroots, growing through shared responsibility. Our acronym KHAW means backbone. We were created in 2012 by the Ealupu Network that was at that time 12 communities who had passed laws in the state of Hawaii that allow communities to collaborate with the government to manage resources together in their nearshore fisheries. Wanted to also confess that I am majorly ignorant about some of the things that will be happening with climate change. I'm learning all the time from all of you. I'm always a little perplexed about what we can do as a community. What we can do is we can rebuild our community. Do we really have a sense of community? Do we really have a connection to our places? I think our folks would disagree that maybe we don't. And yesterday I was on a phone call. I sit on an advisory board for what's called the Agroecology Fund. And the lady who was holding our meeting is in Brazil. I didn't know that at the end of April, Brazil had 3 months worth of rain in 2 weeks. That it impacted 2 million people, displaced 620,000 people, killed almost 180 people, and basically flooded the agricultural heart of Brazil, which is 3 times the size of Portugal. So that's what we're talking about. And did you know that where you're sitting today, there used to be over 400 acres of taro fields, 15 aquacultural sites, all here, this area here. And then in 1893, when the US overthrew the Hawaiian government, a wave of concrete came to this place. Yeah, and what I've learned today, actually from the information we were given in the case studies, is that water is going to come back here. The water that has been displaced is going to come back here, simply because of what I learned about the rock composition under the ground we're standing on. So in some sense, there's a part of Hawaii that's going to return, whether we like it or not. In that context, after the overthrow of Hawaii in 1893, in 1901, a new kind of system of resource management and overlay was placed over what was once the way of caring for our environment in Hawaii. And that came through what's called the 1901 Organic Act, where it basically threw open our environment to a very kind of laissez-faire way of doing things. And that included shutting down the fish ponds today that our communities that I work with are trying to restore, and trying to understand how that is going to impact their relationship with a rising sea. So without getting into the details of what we got to do, I think for my part, my organization basically was created to convene communities to be together, to work together, to weave together, to decide together, and to care together. Those are what I think of as 5 principles of governance, the culture of governance. That when we bring our communities together and we give them time to know each other, they begin to see that their private issues are actually public issues. Their feeling that they were once isolated is actually, it's not true, that they have a lot in common. And when that happens, they identify those private issues as public issues, and then they find ways to work together. And when they tell their stories and talk about their situations, they begin to relate to each other, to have empathy for each other, and to start making decisions together. And in that way, they begin to care together. We've brought ʻAʻalupu together for the last 12 years now. They're statewide. Although their work starts in the fisheries, they also do traditional agriculture. They do watershed restoration. They do cultural site restoration. Some of them are in the room today, and they're going to speak. Some of them opened up for us today, working particularly at Pu'uloa to restore a fish pond there. And they have come together to begin to change the culture of how we care about our place. Change laws that allow communities to actually bring greater governance to the ground, greater local governance that's informed by situated knowledge, the knowledge of the place, something I think that we have neglected. We've focused so much on the big people and the big decisions that are made far away from where the impact of those decisions are, that we need to rebuild a lot of our local governance. And that's what communities are doing by caring for their places. The ʻAʻalupu network has grown from 12 to about 40 communities. We've begun to facilitate a network called the Hui Malama Loku'ia, which is about 40 traditional aquaculture restoration groups taking care of over 60 ponds. And we've also begun to facilitate a network of elders wanting to restore, educate, and bring back the significance of native seaweed to our community. I was trying to wonder why anything I have to say is important to this meeting. But everyone so far, and I know we're still at the beginning, has talked about the need to integrate community more in what they do. And as much as I like to criticize the military, I also know that they're doing more work with community than I've seen before. Some of them are working with our folks who are restoring fish ponds, restoring watersheds. They're helping some of our folks purchase land for the purpose of restoration. And so I think that I want to call that out as a positive indicator. I don't want to say everything is better, but I don't like to dwell on all the hard things all the time. We also got to look at the positive things and the directions we're going. I actually thought I was going to be on a panel, so I didn't really write out a full speech here. I thought I was going to be doing more Q&A. So if there's time later, maybe I can bring more into that conversation. But happy to talk story. And if you want more information, I'm happy to share with you what communities are doing. And I want to also add that the communities in Hawaii are not alone. If you walk right down the street here to this place called the Festival of the Pacific, you're going to see the number of communities that are getting involved in the care of their place. 4 weeks ago, I was with at least 17 of those countries in Fiji. In the Pacific Islands, there are about 10,000 nearshore communities. Of those 10,000, a little over 1,000 are beginning to govern and manage their fisheries with the government or without the government. And that's a movement that's growing. And there's a lot of good that can come out of that. And I hope you all see that because we're missing a spirit of citizen stewardship in general. I think we see that across the U.S. as well. So, mahalo.